Crap, I put this on the poll and I didn't know that this would happen. But now we're here, and I'm supposed to do a short video on Phineas and Ferb. Not a very easy topic to talk about in a short video, and also it means that I have not talked about a movie all season, which is funny. Which just about any way I talk about this is going to dig into my long history with the show. This was the first show that I ever truly fell in love with growing up, and it has remained something that I've loved watching through even as I've gotten older every once in a while. The theme song was literally like the first song I ever memorized in its entirety, and if you would have asked little me, I would have gladly graced you with an awkward performance of it, pausing for the backtrack that wasn't there or making the little guitar noises with my mouth. But nothing is without the view of hindsight, and as I've gotten older, I've noticed something very odd about the show. The last season is kind of weird.
You've saved my factory!
Look, everyone! It is Officer Concord, the Juice Time Juice Box Flavor Cop!
Well done, everyone! Let's dance!
So for those of you unfamiliar with the animated sensation known as the one and only Phineas and Ferb, first off, where have you been for the past decade? Second, it was created by Dan Povenmire and Jeff or Swampy Marsh, with the original idea being from Dan Povenmire about his childhood in Mobile, Alabama, where his mom constantly motivated him to never waste a day of his summer, which arguably led him to pursue his artistic endeavors, including making a lot of home videos that summer. Povenmire himself would go on to work on most of the iconic cartoons of the last couple decades, from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 80s run to Rocko's Modern Life, Family Guy, SpongeBob, and even The Simpsons, where Dan and Jeff ended up first working together. The two of them loved the idea for what would become Phineas and Ferb, and actually worked on it for years, pitching it around without much luck. Eventually, they went off to work on separate things, and Povenmire would try pitching it a couple more times. Nickelodeon thought the idea of two boys who have completely different build activities each day with a bunch of different side characters and plots would be way too complicated. But eventually, Dan got a pitch with Disney, and they didn't seem to love it too much, but they kept the packet from the pitch. And despite this seeming like a courtesy thing, they ended up getting back to him, and as he is quoted in saying in Animated World magazine, Disney was the first to say, "Let's see if you can do it in 11 minutes." We did it in the pilot, and they said, "Let's see if you can do it for 26 more episodes." And thus, the show as we know it was born, despite its vague premise. And what would make this loose premise work was the way they would go about writing it, with each episode following specific and strict rules from the four main writers. Stuff like the boys would always invent the stuff they do, never using any magic, and that each episode would have a strict A plot and B plot, with the plot A being whatever Phineas and Ferb planned, usually serving more as a setting for the rest of the characters to interact than the actual story of the episode itself. The plot would also have to always miraculously work out in the boys' favor without them ever being any wiser. Again, Dan is quoted saying in an interview, "The essence of story is that characters are changed by what happens to them. Nothing ever changes the boys. They never learn anything, there's never any obstacle they have to overcome, everything just works out for them." And these strict episode guidelines and the unique approach to the boys' characters would be more or less followed in every episode, along with several running gags that would sometimes extend the entire series, with characters almost always behaving the same way and even having same lines that they repeat every episode. Each episode would have two 11-minute stories, and each would be quickly reviewed and rewritten several times by the writing crew. And really, it was often these strict guidelines that led to most of the show's iconic elements, along with its amazing progression of each character and the bits throughout the show. Not only in each episode would there be a lot of great jokes that could range from easy for kids to understand, to only adults would understand, to even only the staff would understand. Each episode would often feature one or two musical numbers, so well written that they would constantly win Emmys and are often what most people remember the show for. They also all feature at least one big chase or action scene, making each segment extremely digestible and fun for almost any audience member.
It's back! I told you! It's returned. Oh, excuse me, I forgot my satchel.
And after the hit success of the first season, the show would go to build on these moments while still mostly fitting them into the same structure. You would have characters like Perry and Dr. Doofenshmirtz, easily two of the most iconic and well-known characters from the series, and their interesting take on the Nemesis dynamic, turned into several entire ongoing plots and songs, as well as building into one of the sweetest and most funny friendships of the show. Perry always being there for Dr. Doofenshmirtz when he really needs it, and Doofenshmirtz always confiding in Perry as his only true friend, and someone who would listen to him, not just despite the fact that they are at odds with each other being on the sides of good and evil, but because of it. All in all, the show was a true masterclass in children's animated television, and I would argue that most of this comes from one good simple idea stretched to its maximum through inventive and imaginative writing and strict guidelines, with an iconic cast of extremely well-developed, especially for a kids show, characters, and mostly standalone stories each half episode. But I do say stretched to the maximum because for as much as I love this show, and still love every season to death, the show couldn't last forever, and the signs were there when Season 4 released. And the elements that make me say that simultaneously make Season 4 my least favorite season, but also probably the one I think about the most, with its episodes getting increasingly weirder and breaking some of the formulas of the previous show, and there being like 5 things that feel like they should be season finales and attempts to set up spin-offs. So let's talk about how the season itself actually progresses. The 4th and final season of the show, or at least it would be the final, except the fact that they announced 2 new seasons coming soon, which I'll get to later, ran from December 7th, 2012 to January 15th, 2016. And if you're thinking, that seems like an awful long time for one season of television to be running, you'd be right. It is. The season would be announced as early as August of 2011, and dropping its first episode for your ice only / Happy New Year in time for New Year's, if you can imagine. And the rest of the episodes would follow the weirdest release schedule that I've seen for any of these seasons. There would be an episode on December 7th, January 11th, January 18th, February 1st, February 15th, March 1st, March 2nd, April 5th, and it goes on like that for the entire season. Compared to even Season 3's rather consistent release schedule, it's just kind of odd, usually only having 1 or 2 episodes a month. You could tell that things were already a bit off compared to the rest of the show, and I tried to track down any details on the production itself of that season, feeling as if it would be a little bit more troubled. And the most I could find was an article from 2014 talking about the fact that Swampy Marsh was rather harshly saying that despite the animators and crew being laid off, the show itself wasn't being cancelled, claiming that they were just taking a break and making plans for the future. So the general vibe I get in all the research I had found for this season is that the Disney execs were holding this show on its last limb if they didn't pull off a miracle. And despite to my knowledge and research the show still doing pretty okay by this season, they just didn't seem to have the juice on the back end to keep going. In fact, their only hope was to either strike big with Rising Trends or create some kind of spin-off show. So if we look through the episode's releases in the timeline of events with this weird maybe 1 or 2 episode a month structure, you can kind of watch the show bleed out in a really interesting way that made the episodes themselves so much weirder than their predecessors. The beginning of the season's episodes are pretty typical Phineas and Ferb fare for the late game in the show, following more or less the traditional plot structure and using these far-grown character arcs to work through their story. But if you'll forgive me a little critical lens, a lot of these arcs by this point have already been completed, and there weren't too many ways to keep up the status quo while really making it interesting. That's why there's a couple very ham-fisted feeling episodes when it comes to stuff like Agent P and Dr. Doofenshmirtz, like the episode Fly on the Wall. We have Dr. Doofenshmirtz in scientist block, and he asks Perry to help him get his groove back so he can make evil inventions again, which is a fine and fun concept and all, and works with the characters brought to this point. But again, we've seen their relationship taken to this point already, and the montage and ending note, as this isn't given much priority in the episode runtime, makes this almost feel played out. And you get that with a lot of these early episodes. They're not bad by any means, but they stand to me as some of the least memorable things in the entire show. Things like Sidetracked, an episode where Agent P has this weird agent plot with a Canadian agent and a weird villain. And while there's stuff here that should work, they've already done this several times. The whole Agent P works with another agent, even though he likes to work alone. Both with other animal agents and with a human agent in Britain. And the UK one is actually really fun, because they play him like Bond, but stupid, who thinks he's getting stuff done, even though it's all Perry.
There you go. Good thing I had the watch laser.
But with this Canadian agent, they have this weirdly toned, serious, I work alone because I can't let anyone get close to me thing. And although that's clearly meant to be a parody of Bond himself, it doesn't really do anything as a parody or a satire. And there are some funny Canadian jokes, but the characters on the whole aren't that funny, and the relationship between this agent and Perry is mostly played straight for the whole episode, despite the villain being laughably stupid. The episode just doesn't gel, and often feels like it's working to be rather forgettable among a lot of great similar episodes. And these weirdly toned, not that great episodes carry most of the beginning of the season until we started getting into the more odd inclusions. We have stuff like B-Day and B-Story, two 11-minute part stories that play opposite sides of the same events of a day, each mostly mediocre and unmemorable save for a couple jokes, and having this really weird sense of high tension and melodrama. Or, aired in June of 2013, you have Phineas and Ferb's musical Cliptastic, hosted by Kelly Osbourne, this weirdly toned second musical clip show that they've done, which, like the first one, is actually pretty good and funny and understandable for a show like this to do budget-wise. But this one is honestly kind of painful outside of the songs, and it feels like it couldn't have been made for budget reasons because they keep having all of these live-action Disney Channel celebrities come in along with a live-action host, and just not really much story, making this honestly one of the most widely agreed upon worst episodes of the show, not even making it onto Disney+. And after this you'd get more weirdly toned sporadic episodes, though despite my cynicism here, some of these can still be pretty great, like Just Desserts, where Candace reads this entire audiobook for the Fireside Girls, just so they can actually help Phineas and Ferb build what they were planning on that day, and then she tries to rush through the entire book in one day to where she can actually bust them in time, which is honestly a really great premise. But it's here where we hit what I would say was the start of the true whack to watch downfall of the season, when we got the first crossover. I'm sure this crossover was encouraged by Disney as to try and get more people interested and excited to be watching the show. I mean, they even announced it at Comic-Con. But man, I really hate these crossovers, and most episodes after the first one start to switch tone for the second half of the season. The first crossover being Phineas and Ferb Mission Marvel, which no, I don't say I don't like it just because of oversaturation of the MCU or something like that. I didn't like this episode when it came out back in 2013, and I had barely seen any superhero movies, and their practices hadn't gotten as soul-suckingly bad yet. I don't like this special because it's a tonal mess for the show. It completely changes most of the structure of the show, focusing much less on the actual creativity of the boys, or lots of the fun-running gags, but yet again, this weirdly serious and melodramatic conflict. Like the moments when Phineas gets mad at Candace because she's such a klutz in the episode. And Phineas yells to her about the fact that she clearly doesn't realize how great the stakes are here, though. Even though we've seen like a million world-ending level inventions throughout the show, and again, things always work out in comedic ways without the boys ever worrying, because that's part of the premise of the show.
What?
Really, Candace? Do you have any idea what you just did?
I was just trying to help.
Well, your help this morning messed us up so badly, we came this close to being wiped out at the mall. I thought you would have learned your lesson.
But
no. You show up again to help, and now Baljeet been Hulkified and is rampaging who knows where. And we're back to square one with restoring the hero's powers.
But...
This is just too important, and we can't afford any more setbacks. I'm revoking your shed card. You have to go, now.
But even the other time in the show that Phineas actually gets mad at Candace is even less out of character than this, more being for realistic feeling reasons in a big special, whereas this, they're just mad at her for being clumsy and messing up a couple things, which she's always been clumsy, and part of their whole character dynamic is that the boys look up to her no matter what she does, and no matter how much of an attempt she takes to try and bust them, they always love Candace more than anything else and think she's awesome.
There's one right there.
Phineas, I'm not gonna get on a silly little tricycle.
Candace, we're in a hurry. Just get on the trike and
There's
we'll go.
no way I'm
Get on
gonna-
the trike!
Get on the trike from the end of Summer Belongs to You. Now, the reason I'm proud of this gag is that it is not an inherently funny line, and yet it gets a huge laugh. That laugh is all about character. That laugh happens because we spent an entire season letting you get to know him and know who he is, and we spent the last 30 minutes letting you see where he's gotten to emotionally. That is not a cheap laugh. That is an expensive laugh.
So for Phineas to break character completely because of Marvel villains that are worked weirdly into the show, it just makes it a really annoying episode for me that I don't like to watch. I wouldn't call this even a bad episode of the show, all things considered. Again, I wouldn't call this season bad overall. There's still a lot I love about it, but the holes in the show's long-running structure were starting to form, and it really feels like the creative and writing team could feel Disney over them with their creative decisions throughout especially the rest of the season. And what they found were big events and specials like this actually worked. Mission Marvel brought them in an estimated 3.8 million viewers, making it the #1 youth television program at the time on TV. So the rest of the episodes after it start to take these ideas and form them into, we need more dramatic, high-stakes specials with unique changed settings for the characters. And so they went with that, with one of the weirdest Halloween specials from the show, seemingly to go even more over the top in comparison to the others with its drama and even more wacky with its jokes.
You've saved my factory!
To Steampunks, an episode where the boys flash back to the 1903 Danville's World's Fair that's for some reason steampunk and has weird versions of all of them. Or even Phineas and Ferb Save Summer, a 2 full-slot 25-minute episode special that for some reason isn't the season finale, it's just there towards the end, with very high stakes and big plot threads running through this 50-minute story. And this happens again with the Klimpaloon Ultimatum. While not 50 minutes, it's another full 25 minutes of just one over-the-top high-stakes story, trying to capture the viewership that the high-stakes specials often brought. And then again, they have the Star Wars crossover, which is even more bland than the Marvel one. And it shows with a decline of viewership, despite the fact that there were a lot of people, especially in this age demographic that they were going for, excited for new Star Wars content. But this brought in only 2.5 million viewers. Still a lot, but a major drop down if you look at the Marvel special that didn't come out too much earlier than this. But this just kept carrying on for the rest of the season. A couple weird, unmemorable, trying to do something new episodes, and then boom, Night of the Living Pharmacists. Another 50-minute special, this one featuring cameos from Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. And it was at this point that the show started to get on rocky ground, as none of these far more ambitious, harder to animate specials were bringing in much return in viewership, or big movements towards the show like they were hoping for it to. It's around here that the article I found earlier was dated, where the show was more or less indefinitely on hold. They would release only a couple more episodes with a crossover from the movie that came out back in 2011, that is fine, and Doof 101, an attempt to make a spin-off show set sometime after the show, as Doofenshmirtz is finally punished for all his evil, and is forced to teach at a high school for some reason. It's weird and isn't very funny and never led to anything. And then, as the show was on its last leg, they released Act Your Age and The Last Day of Summer. Act Your Age being arguably the most memorable and best episode of the season, coming back to Danville 10 years after the show, as we get to see heartfelt epilogues for where our characters would end up and how a lot of the relationships, which due to the structure and episodic nature of the show, never really had a chance to resolve, would end up. It's really sweet and practically perfect in its tone and comedy, even though it has a bit more melodrama. In this instance, it works because the stakes are stakes we care about. Stakes we've cared about the entire length of the show, not just stuff tacked on. And then The Last Day of Summer, which is pretty okay. It's not as good as Act Your Age or even something like Summer Belongs to You from several seasons before, and I don't like how high they go with the stakes, but it's still a pretty fun ending to the show, paired with a sweet epilogue. And that was kind of it. Some of the weirdest and wackiest episodes of the show that aren't always bad, but when studio involvement didn't make every episode feel like it was the season finale, most of the episodes just never really reached the highs that season 2 or 3 would hit. And watching this season honestly kind of makes me sad, as you can just feel the show kind of starving for a direction to take itself. It doesn't know what it wants to be, and the success of the Mission Marvel special led it down a path to give us these weird, wacky, but still more or less fun adventures that make the entire season feel like a well-rounded but weirdly paced epic conclusion. But, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah! What about the Alka Files? They suck. As a last-ditch effort to create another theoretical spin-off, just like Doof 101, in 2016 they dropped the Alka Files, a weirdly toned, unfunny mess with new weird side characters and a plot that feels like it directly steps on the toes of Doof 101 in terms of being what Dr. Doofenshmirtz does after his life of crime is over. But all the other animal agents are annoying, the concept just doesn't work, and the only funny thing going on is this weirdly out of place for Phineas and Ferb bug subplot. And it's really only mostly funny because of absolutely wild voice casting decisions.
Sir, let me throw it! I'm the muscle!
You're the muscle.
Yes, you're the brains, I'm the muscle, and Floyd is...
Floyd is the ballast.
Yes, Floyd is the ballast!
Ooh, that sounds important.
Perry is here, of course, and it just feels weird to not have any ties to normal run Phineas and Ferb, and the pacing just doesn't work to have your A-plot be all of this annoying stuff with Dr. Doofenshmirtz being bad at being a good agent, and your B-plot being random bugs that never once succeed in their attempt to interact with the rest of the plot. It is kind of ridiculous, and I really actually hate these episodes, and I don't have too much to say about them, but I always skip them, and it really just makes me kind of sad to see this last-ditch attempt of the show just bleeding out in front of me in season 4, along with the comedy just not working that well. So what was the point of going over all this? Really, there wasn't any overarching statement I was trying to make. I just wanted to take some time to have a fun discussion on what I think was a very weird point in a show I still very much love to this day. And I really just wanted to look at the reasons that I feel like it ended so strangely and abruptly, and also the reasons I think it'll be very interesting to see what the creators do with the season 5 and 6. Honestly, I'm kind of nervous. Seeing stuff like Milo Murphy and Hamster and Gretel, their style has just changed. I could go on further talking about the cameos and inclusions of Phineas and Ferb characters in Milo Murphy, and why I'm not really a big fan of them, but it seems kind of pointless as I don't really have any strong feelings towards that show. And again, I have nothing against the creators for the decisions they made in season 4. From what I can tell, they were under a lot of pressure from Disney, and that can kill almost any project, no matter how good the artists are. But I just wanted to take a look back at the weird and chaotically fun ending to the show, and my only hope for the future seasons of the show is that it would bring a new audience to the original seasons, because this show was super influential and important to me growing up, like seriously, to my behaviors and loves and interests, and what me and my brother would do during our free time. We started trying to invent stuff, and it just tapped us into our creativity a lot more. And I love watching through it now, and I hope that it can bring that impact to new generations. And despite me not hating Candace against the universe, though it definitely has a lot of problems, but it was a COVID project of a long-ended show, how could it not? But I really don't think that was bringing anyone new to the show. Obviously, I don't know, but I feel like most of the viewership of that movie was from people who watched the show when it was aired. So yeah, here's to Dan and Swampy. You guys made a fantastic series that had a weird, goofy, probably out of your hands ending, and I hope you guys can bring something new and fun and original to the new seasons. And I hope you guys enjoyed looking into this season and how actually weird it becomes if you look just under the surface of any given episode outside of the context of the show. Thanks for watching.
There is no candy in me. There is no candy in me. I am just a little boy. There is no candy in me. Your mother is blindfolded so she cannot see. She attacked me with a bat. There is no candy in me.
Nerd ain't no pinata.